"Ma'am, step away from the woman and keep your hands where I can see them." That wasn't a warning. It was a command, and it shattered the peaceful morning like a grenade. My wife, Sarah, had been tying her shoelace on our front lawn old hoodie jogger's hair in a loose bun. The only thing out of place, a legally holstered sidearm on her hip. Two cops stood at the curb, hands twitching on their weapons. One looked panicked. The other whispered into his radio, "Possible threat, female, armed." Then everything stopped. His eyes dropped to Sarah's waist, where her badge rested. "Wait, Chief Bennett," he stammered. "Oh my God!" Across the street, Victoria Harlow, the neighborhood's self-declared queen, clutched her phone smugly. She had no idea she'd just filed a false armed threat report on the new chief of police. And that was just the beginning. Victoria Harlow wasn't just any neighbor. She was the self-elected monarch of our quiet suburb, reigning over the HOA like it was her personal empire. 3 terms in a row, thanks to suspiciously low voter turnout and strategically timed community BBQs. She had a clipboard, a dog that barked at leaves, and a mission to turn our street into a suburban dictatorship. Tall grass, $25, fine. Chalk drawings, $50. Holiday lights still up after New Year's, that's $100, thank you very much. But her latest crusade, visible firearms. She claimed it made residents uncomfortable, never mind that we lived in an open carry state. To her, Sarah wasn't a neighbor. She was a threat to her control. And when Victoria saw Sarah with her holstered weapon that morning, she didn't see a law-abiding officer. She saw defiance. And for someone like Victoria, that was unforgivable. 2 days before the 911 call, Victoria stormed into our yard like she owned the grass beneath her feet. Sarah was outside oiling her garden shears, calm and casual. "I'm issuing a $500 daily fine," Victoria snapped, for wearing a firearm in plain view. "That's against HOA policy." Sarah didn't flinch. "I'm off duty. It's legal, Victoria. HOA has no jurisdiction over constitutional rights." Victoria crossed her arms, jaw tight. "That may be true for civilians, but you're supposed to set an example, not look like you're ready for a gunfight." Sarah looked her dead in the eye. "I am setting an example, one that respects actual law, not rules made up on power trips." Victoria's lips curled. "I'll fix this." Then she walked away. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just drawn a line in the sand. And Sarah wasn't the one about to cross it. The morning of the call, Victoria stood across the street sipping her lukewarm coffee like it was champagne. Her phone was already in her hand before Sarah even stepped onto the lawn. She watched Sarah jog out, hoodie-zipped, halfway, firearm holstered neatly at her side, legal routine, normal. But to Victoria, it was ammunition. She dialed 911 and whispered with urgency as if narrating a hostage crisis. "There's a woman with a gun. She's acting suspicious. She might be dangerous. Please hurry." She didn't say Sarah's name. She didn't mention the badge. Just enough panic to guarantee a full response. When the sirens wailed down the street minutes later, Victoria smiled. She thought she'd triggered the downfall of her biggest obstacle. What she'd actually done was commit a felony, knowingly filing a false police report. And the woman she tried to frame was about to take that personally. The officers arrived fast, sirens off adrenaline high. One gripped his taser. The other hovered over his holstered Glock. Sarah stood still, hands visible, calm as a sunrise. "Good morning, officers," she said evenly. The younger cop's eyes darted to her hip. "Suspect is armed," he murmured into his radio. "Female, possibly hostile, HOA complaint." But then, he saw it. Clipped to Sarah's waistband, casual, almost hidden, was her badge. His voice cracked. "Wait. Chief Bennett?" The older cop blinked. Oh my God. Both men took a step back like they'd just aimed their guns at a ghost. Sarah gave a slow, respectful nod. "I assume you're just doing your job." They nodded, sheepish. One even apologized. But across the street, Victoria was fuming. This wasn't the grand takedown she had imagined. It was the beginning of hers. Victoria stood frozen, her little dog squirming in her arms as the officers holstered their weapons and stepped aside. Sarah walked over, measured, composed, and locked eyes with her. "Victoria," she said, voice low but firm. "You just filed a false armed threat report against a law-abiding citizen. That's a felony." Victoria's smugness cracked. "I didn't know it was you," she stammered. "You weren't in uniform. How was I supposed to know you weren't dangerous?" Sarah didn't blink. "That's exactly why you don't call the police unless there's an actual threat. You put neighbors at risk. You put yourself at risk." Victoria looked around. People had started watching from porches and windows. A few even pulled out phones. The neighborhood had witnessed everything. Sarah turned to leave, but Victoria wasn't finished. Not even close. She was about to go from manipulative to unhinged. That evening, our doorbell rang not once but 6 times. One by one, neighbors showed up with brownies pie, a 6-pack of soda, and solidarity. "We saw everything," said Greg, the quiet guy from 2 doors down. "Victoria's lost her damn mind. What can we do to help?" It caught Sarah off guard. She wasn't used to public support. Even as chief, she stayed low profile, more protector than politician. But now, her quiet strength had become a rallying point. Still, Victoria wasn't done. The next morning, she dropped a glossy HOA newsletter into every mailbox on the street. The headline read, "Restoring Safety and Decency to Our Streets." She painted herself as a frightened civilian who'd narrowly escaped a traumatic gun encounter, and Sarah reduced to a woman known to be affiliated with law enforcement. No name, no truth, just venom. And it was only getting worse. The newsletter hit hard, full of manipulative language, twisted quotes, and a dramatized version of events that made Victoria sound like a hero, and Sarah like a ticking time bomb. She brandished a weapon while walking among families, it claimed. "I feared for my life." No mention of the badge. No mention of the legal carry laws. Just fear-mongering crafted to turn the neighborhood against Sarah. But Sarah didn't take the bait. No press conference, no Facebook rant. Instead, she called the city attorney's office, submitted a formal complaint, attached her body cam footage, and requested a review of Victoria's abuse of HOA authority. She wasn't going to argue with lies. She was going to bury them with facts. Meanwhile, Victoria doubled down, furious her fear campaign hadn't taken root, but she had no idea what was about to be unleashed, or who was watching closely. By midweek, Sarah had compiled everything: body cam footage, HOA newsletters, and a transcript of the 911 call. She handed it all over, quietly, methodically, to the City Council's Legal Review Board. What they found was disturbing. Victoria had been issuing fines without board approval, altering meeting minutes, and enforcing HOA rules that didn't exist. Worse, several residents had received anonymous letters warning them not to associate with Sarah or anyone who questioned Victoria's authority. All of them traced back to HOA mailers. During a closed-door session, one council member muttered, "I thought HOA was about landscaping and trash pickup, not intimidation and surveillance." Meanwhile, Victoria was planning another power move, an emergency HOA meeting citing rising unrest and safety concerns. But this time, the crowd she thought she controlled wasn't there to support her. They were there to confront her. The community center was packed, standing room only. Victoria strutted in like a general before battle stack of papers in hand, fake smile plastered on. She opened with fear-mongering, "We must restore order. Visible weapons threaten our peace." The recent incident was traumatic for all of us, but the room didn't nod. It bristled. Greg, the soft-spoken neighbor, stood up. "You lied to the police about our neighbor, the chief of police. You endangered everyone. You're lucky we're not voting you out tonight." A gasp rippled through the room. Victoria flushed red but pressed on citing her own 911 call as proof of danger. That's when her own vice president leaned over, whispered something. Her face froze. She looked around and realized her power was slipping. This wasn't her HOA anymore. It was about to become her trial. Victoria left the meeting humiliated, but not defeated. Desperation makes tyrants reckless. Within 48 hours, she started making late-night phone calls trying to dig up dirt on Sarah. She contacted reporters, spun stories, even reached out to a fringe blog claiming a rogue cop had infiltrated suburbia. But what she didn't know, one of those reporters had a teenage son. That son had once been pulled from a burning car by Sarah. The reporter didn't just kill the story. He flagged it. Meanwhile, Victoria submitted a new motion, a formal ban on visible weapons in public spaces within HOA jurisdiction. She wanted to change local policy using a personal vendetta, but Sarah didn't react. She was too busy working behind the scenes, gathering evidence, connecting dots. Victoria thought she was launching a counterattack. In truth, she'd just handed Sarah the match to burn the entire facade down. While Victoria screamed into every outlet that would listen, Sarah moved in silence. She compiled documents, HOA meeting minutes illegally, issued fines, and a full timeline of Victoria's manipulations. Then she made 3 strategic moves. First, she submitted an ethics violation report with the city clerk. Second, she forwarded the 911 transcript complete with timestamps to the Public Integrity Board highlighting how Victoria knowingly misled emergency services. Third, she looped in internal affairs not to defend herself but to ensure full transparency. Sarah didn't want revenge. She wanted accountability. And the beauty of it, she never raised her voice, never posted a single status, just paper and law. Meanwhile, Victoria sensed something was off. People had stopped answering her calls. Even her inner circle was going silent. She didn't realize it yet, but the walls were closing in. Victoria called for another emergency HOA meeting this time to address the campaign of intimidation she claimed Sarah was leading. But the turnout was different. No more nodding heads, no forced smiles. Just stiff silence. She rambled about safety, respect, and preserving the moral core of the neighborhood. Then Mrs. Geller 75 Cardigan and all stood up. "I've lived here 35 years," she said. "I've seen Sarah help more people than you find." Applause. Real spontaneous loud. Victoria tried to interrupt, but another man stood holding a printed HOA newsletter. "You want to talk about safety," he said. "You lied to the police. That's not leadership. That's reckless." Victoria's voice cracked. "You're staging a mutiny." No, someone muttered from the back. "We're finally waking up." And in that moment, Victoria wasn't the authority anymore. She was the outcast. The next day, things got darker. Sarah noticed a small drone hovering outside our window twice. It wasn't city-issued. It had no markings. That same afternoon, a neighbor reported receiving a flyer slipped under her door watch for armed joggers. Report suspicious movement. HOA security is watching. There was no HOA security. Sarah filed an official complaint. But that night it escalated. We woke to glass shattering, our backyard door smashed in. Nothing was stolen. Just a hammer on the floor and muddy boot prints. Sarah swept the house, firearm drawn calm but focused. One of the prints matched a shoe type worn by Victoria's so-called neighborhood patrol. She wasn't just gaslighting anymore. She was crossing into intimidation by force. But here's what she didn't understand. Sarah wasn't scared. She was documenting everything. The next night they came back, this time not subtle. 3 men, black hoodies, no license plates. One held a crowbar, another carried bolt cutters. But what they didn't know, Sarah wasn't asleep. She'd been tracking patterns, and tonight, she was ready. The moment the gate creaked, she was out the back door, silent, armed body cam rolling. "Drop it," she ordered. One ran. The second lunged. Sarah sidestepped, twisted his arm, and dropped him face first into the grass. The third froze, hands up. Minutes later, 2 squad cars rolled in. The men were cuffed, shaken, one muttering, "She said it'd just scare her." She, Victoria. Turns out she'd hired them as private security. Unlicensed, uninsured. And now officially exposed. Sarah didn't just defend herself. She flipped the narrative and turned fear into fuel. While the arrested men were processed, one officer handed Sarah a confiscated tablet from their car. password protected, but not for long. Inside a folder titled Neighborhood Watch Priority Targets. What it contained was chilling. Photos of residents. Notes like excessively vocal, overly friendly with Sarah, and even one tagged suspicious eye contact. Kids who skateboarded near the clubhouse were labeled Mobile Risk Units. Sarah's name topped the list. Beside it, Uncontrollable. Must isolate. Badge won't protect her forever. And all files traced back to one author, V. Harlow. Victoria hadn't just abused power, she'd built an underground surveillance operation. Sarah forwarded everything to the district attorney, the city council, and internal affairs. This wasn't HOA drama anymore. It was criminal infrastructure, and now it was unraveling fast. Victoria didn't retreat. She escalated. Days after the arrests, every doorstep in the neighborhood received another flyer, this one, slick, bold, and full of venom. Headline, Are You Safe with Armed Officers Living Among Us? It featured a heavily edited image of Sarah mid-jog sidearm exposed with red text overlay. Dangerous, unstable, untouchable. There was no signature, no HOA seal, just fear. And it worked on the wrong person. A nervous new neighbor spotted Sarah unloading groceries, sidearm still holstered. He panicked and called 911. Again. But this time, the responding officer recognized Sarah instantly. He'd trained under her just 2 months ago. He apologized. She smiled politely, then filed another report, this time for public defamation and incitement. Because now Victoria's propaganda wasn't just unethical, it was putting lives at risk. While Victoria stirred panic, Sarah stayed focused. No shouting matches, no online rebuttals. Instead, she compiled a full legal dossier. Flyers' false claims, HOA documents, surveillance data, and the botched 911 transcripts. She submitted it to the city's legal department and then escalated to the State Public Integrity Board. Her claim, sustained harassment, public endangerment, abuse of civic power, and she didn't stop there. She proposed a new policy, mandatory oversight and financial auditing of all HOA boards statewide. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was building a system to protect others. Meanwhile, inside the HOA, the pressure mounted. Members were jumping ship. One resigned, citing personal ethics. Victoria was still chairing meetings, but every seat around her was now empty. She hadn't just lost control, she'd become radioactive. Just when the neighborhood began to settle, it landed, a thick envelope hand-delivered by a courier. Inside, a lawsuit. Victoria Harlow was suing Sarah. Charges: defamation of character, emotional distress, and ironically unlawful intimidation by a public official. The hypocrisy was almost laughable. Sarah didn't flinch. She read the pages, exhaled, and handed them to her brother Evan, a seasoned civil attorney who'd been waiting for this. His verdict: This reads like a conspiracy blog post. He was more amused than angry. Sarah calm as ever. She gave him the green light and went back to work like nothing happened. But Evan was already sharpening the legal blade, and Victoria, so used to bending rules behind closed doors, was about to face the kind of spotlight you can't spin away from. Courtroom spotlight. Evan didn't waste time. Within days, he filed a motion to dismiss Victoria's lawsuit backed by a mountain of evidence. Body cam footage, official reports, HOA, financial irregularities, drone surveillance, and the crown jewel, Victoria's own flyers and meeting transcripts. But Evan didn't stop at defense, he countersued. Malicious prosecution, abuse of civil process, intentional infliction of emotional distress. His opening brief ended with a line that made Sarah smirk. This isn't a defamation case, it's a temper tantrum in a pantsuit. Victoria's attorney, a local billboard celebrity, started sweating in court. Behind the scenes, HOA board members began leaking internal messages, emails, where Victoria bragged about shutting Sarah down. One read, "She thinks the badge will protect her. Let's see how she likes being targeted." The truth wasn't just coming out, it was roaring into the courtroom. While legal blows landed in court, the city's audit team dropped a bombshell. Over $75,000 in HOA funds had been misallocated under Victoria's presidency. The spending labeled as community security enhancements. Reality, fake invoices. Payments to a so-called private contractor, no license, no insurance, and no physical address. Translation: a ghost company. A front. Possibly just a shell to move funds. When pressed, Victoria claimed those were necessary safety measures, but the contractor's listed phone number disconnected, and 2 payments had been deposited into an account linked to a name suspiciously similar to her cousin's. The district attorney opened a formal investigation into potential fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of HOA authority. Victoria hadn't just picked the wrong target. She'd opened a door into her own corruption, and now the entire city was watching her fall. In one last desperate grasp at control, Victoria agreed to appear on a local fringe podcast, hoping to spin the narrative. The host was known for wild conspiracy theories, exactly the crowd Victoria thought would believe her story, and at first it worked. She painted herself as a victim. Sarah weaponized the police. This is a deep state-style takedown of honest homeowners. But then she slipped. Mic hot. Camera rolling. She said, "I didn't care who she was. I wanted her out. You can't let people like that feel untouchable just because they wear a badge." What she didn't know, the podcast's technical editor was a former mentee of Sarah's, now a rookie cop. He flagged the footage, clipped the raw file, and delivered it straight to the district attorney. Victoria hadn't just lied on air. She'd confessed with perfect audio, crystal clear intent. Just days after the podcast clip surfaced, investigators received an anonymous tip Victoria hadn't turned in the real HOA laptop during the audit. The one she submitted, a decoy. They secured a warrant, traced the original device to a private storage unit under her name, and inside they found it. Still logged in. On the desktop folders labeled Control Targets Incident Scripts, and one disturbingly titled Bennett, Weak Points. But the final nail, photoshopped images of Sarah in compromising situations, laughably fake but clearly intended for future smear campaigns. One had Sarah in a biker bar, another vandalizing city property. All metadata led back to Victoria. The DA added evidence tampering and digital fabrication to the growing list of charges. Her case against Sarah wasn't just collapsing. It had imploded. In high definition. With the laptop evidence in hand, investigators got access to Victoria's storage unit. What they found felt more like a villain's lair than HOA supplies. Stacks of unopened HOA property garden signs, unused security cameras, and 4 surveillance drones labeled Neighborhood Safety Patrol. But it got worse. A massive binder labeled Behavior Logs detailed residents' daily routines, personal habits, and bizarre accusations like laughs too loud at night and makes too much eye contact. At the back, a spreadsheet titled Priority Control. Targets next to each name, fabricated violations, made-up quotes, and psychological profiles. Even children weren't spared. 3 boys who skateboarded were labeled Highly Mobile Defiance Units. It was disturbing, deranged, and all of it signed off digitally by V. Harlow. She hadn't been running an HOA. She'd been building a private surveillance regime, and now it was all crashing down. Within 48 hours of the storage unit raid, the city convened an emergency hearing. Charges were read aloud like a shopping list of corruption fraud. Illegal surveillance, abuse of power, filing false police reports, tampering with public records. Victoria sat stone-faced. Her usual smugness wiped clean, and then came the final blow. The mayor stepped forward holding a document. A formal citywide resolution. All HOA boards would now be subject to mandatory audits, transparency protocols, and criminal penalties for overreach inspired entirely by this case. It was unofficially dubbed the Bennett Reform. Sarah watched quietly from the back of the room, arms folded. She never once looked at Victoria. Because this wasn't about revenge, it was about responsibility. Victoria had ruled through fear. Now she was facing something far scarier: justice with receipts. Despite the charges, Victoria refused to resign. So the residents took matters into their own hands. According to the HOA bylaws, if 10 or more homeowners requested a vote of no confidence, a recall could be triggered. They got 34 signatures overnight. At the emergency meeting, Victoria tried to rally support. She blamed Sarah, the city, even the media. But no one flinched. Greg stood up again. "You turned neighbors into suspects and a community into a prison." Applause. Mrs. Geller added, "You don't need to be in jail yet, dear, but you sure don't belong here. The final vote: 28 to remove, 2 to keep, 1 abstention." Victoria stood still for a beat, then stormed out red-faced, silent, alone. Her reign was over, and, for the first time in years, the neighborhood exhaled. With Victoria gone, the neighborhood felt lighter. No more passive-aggressive flyers, no silent stares, no threats over flower beds or porch lights. The interim HOA board released a public apology and suspended every citation issued during Victoria's term. They also launched a transparency portal where every HOA decision required a public vote and online posting. Residents started waving again. Chalk art returned to sidewalks. The park hosted its first Easter egg hunt in 4 years. And Sarah. She stayed quiet, never once asked for recognition. The mayor invited her to speak at a leadership panel. She declined. This wasn't about status, it was about doing the job right. But to the neighborhood, she wasn't just the chief anymore. She was the reason they got their home back, not through power, but through calm, relentless integrity. Victoria disappeared. Her house went dark. Her SUV vanished. For 3 days, it was like she'd evaporated. Then came the foreclosure sign. Turns out, she'd defaulted on multiple loans, one of which had been secured using HOA funds as collateral. Her empire of paranoia and power built on debt and deception. And when it crumbled, so did she. The court froze her assets. The HOA officially banned her from any future role. Even the state's Civic Ethics Board blacklisted her alongside individuals banned for election fraud and public trust violations. But there were no parades, no cheers, just quiet closure. Sarah received the news while sipping coffee on our porch. She didn't smile. She just nodded. "Power doesn't start evil," she whispered. "It gets that way when no one challenges it." And Victoria had finally been challenged by truth. A year later, the neighborhood held a small block celebration. No banners, no speeches, just food, laughter, and peace. Children played tag across the lawn. Seniors chatted freely, no longer afraid of invisible rules. Someone quietly played a song over the speakers, an old ballad about standing up and holding the line. Sarah stood beside me, paper plate in hand, calm as always. People walked by, waved some, even saluted. One boy she'd once helped whispered, "Thanks for keeping us safe." Sarah just nodded, offering that same quiet strength that had held this place together when everything was falling apart. She never tried to become a symbol. She simply became one. Not for power, not for praise, but because she never stopped doing the right thing, even when it was the hard thing. And in doing so, she reminded us all, integrity doesn't need applause. Sarah's story isn't just about a corrupt HOA president or a quiet cop with a badge. It's about how unchecked power, no matter how small, can spiral into control, fear, and division. But more importantly, it's about how integrity, calm, courage, and a united community can dismantle that power piece by piece. We don't need capes or loud voices to make change. Sometimes it just takes someone who refuses to back down when truth is on the line. So now we ask you, have you ever witnessed or lived through a battle like this? One where decency pushed back against abuse. What did it teach you about leadership, accountability, and community? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk. Let's listen. Let's grow. And if Sarah's journey moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and help us keep telling stories that remind us what justice really looks like.